There we go. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ashley Collins. I'm the Communications Coordinator for the Office for Peace and Justice, and welcome to another episode of Project CST's live broadcasting about Catholic social teaching. Tonight we have a very special guest, Maria Fitzsimmons. There she is. She is our Organizing Catholics for Justice organizer and Justice Education Coordinator. And I'll let the other two lovely ladies introduce themselves.
I'm Bethany. I am a social communications intern with the Office for Peace and Justice, and I'm going to go push buttons instead of talking now.
And I'm Brianna. I'm the other OPJ intern for communication, and I will be conducting this interview.
All right. So this week's focus on Project CST is the dignity of work and the rights of workers. So we've covered the dignity of the human person, the importance to live and grow in community and family and participate as a giving member of a community. And now we're going to talk about how work and how jobs and how all of that fits together as part of the human person. And so, Brianna, would you like to introduce our special guest tonight?
Sure. Our special guest is named Maria Fitzsimmons, and I'll let her introduce yourselves right now.
It's probably a good idea.
Okay, so as Ashley mentioned, I'm the Justice Education Coordinator with the Office for Peace and Justice, as well as the staff organizer for Organizing Catholics for Justice, which is a program in the Office for Peace and Justice dedicated to putting grassroots organizing to work for Catholic social teaching in the region. So we want to make Catholic social teaching a center of our policy agenda in the Chicagoland area, and make sure that our decision makers in the region, elected officials, business leaders, community leaders, are putting our values at the center of their decision making. And we are able to do that with people power.
Awesome.
So that's what I do with the Office for Peace and Justice. I'm also, I have a degree in international political economics and theology from Fordham University in the Bronx, a Jesuit institution. And a deep interest in Catholic social teaching and its advancement within our church as well as outside of it.
Thanks, Maria. So what does the church teach about dignity of work, and what does it mean by the rights of workers?
So as the work of Project CST, Project CST, is dedicated to focusing on the 7 kind of main focal points of Catholic social teaching, and the dignity of work and the rights of workers is one of those. And it's highlighted as one of the 7 because it is vitally important in our faith. So the basis of all of Catholic social teaching is human dignity and the love of God for all of creation. And that has serious implications through all of society. It's not just a nice idea. We can take that idea and make sure that it is implemented in specific ways in society, and one of those key ways is through the respect for work and workers. So work is something that we all do. We're all workers. Jesus Christ himself was a worker. His parents were workers. Each of us has an identity as a worker in society. We all do different kinds of work, and even for some very specific and very small parts of the population, perhaps they don't work at all, and their wealth is created through investments or other things. But an overwhelming majority of us, for the majority of human history, have the identity as workers. And so because of that, it's important that we honor that work has dignity, that it's your participation in society, your ability to advance its growth is a part of who you are, and we should respect that. And as such, you have worth as a human being and should be able to feed yourself and clothe yourself and care for your family. And if your work doesn't allow you to do that because you aren't getting enough wages or you're being constantly put in dangerous situations, then we are not supporting a system that always and consistently respects the dignity of the human person. So it is important that we highlight the value of work and workers as people of faith so that we can ensure that human dignity is being respected at every level of society, and one of those important levels is work. And so in our church, kind of the modern beginning of Catholic social teaching, all of Catholic social teaching is based in the gospel and is advanced in the history of our church through theologians and church teachings. But the kind of modern underpinning for Catholic social teaching is in Rerum Novarum, a papal encyclical that was published in 1891. That in many ways was a response to the immense social changes brought on by the Industrial Revolution, which had an incredible import for work and workers. And so modern Catholic social teaching, as it is today, is really founded in the understanding that we are workers, and this is like the first way we can understand how to put the dignity of each individual person, the identity of each person as a child of God, at the center of our society, and that is by respecting work and workers.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. So if I can ask, why is this an important topic? Aren't we over slave labor?
Well, there are a lot of answers to that. The first is that we're not over slave labor. That's like the easiest answer. In the United States, we made a lot of wealth in this society by enslaving people and not paying them for their work, and also stealing land and removing people and families and cultures from that land. And that created a lot of wealth for specific people and has resulted in an increasing and growing disparity between specific groups of people, particularly affecting people of color in this society. So in many ways in the United States, we are still affected by the legacy of slave labor, but slavery exists in the U.S. and abroad in many ways. There's certainly a culture and a consistent problem of human trafficking, both for labor as well as for the sexual trades, which results in human beings not being respected in many ways, specifically by being forced to do work either for in agricultural or industrial ways, or also being forced into prostitution. And that is a consistent problem abroad as well as in the United States. Human trafficking happens here as well. Additionally, there are other ways that human beings are still put into slavery, and by slavery we mean their rights as workers are not respected, and they're not being given any wage or even a reasonable wage for their work. So, for example, wage theft is an enormous problem in the world today, especially in the United States. There was a study done in 2009 in the cities of New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago alone. Over $3 billion in wages were stolen in 1 year. That results to about $56 million per week. So people who had worked, people who had done a day's work and either were not compensated or were compensated below the minimum wage, or they were told that they would be compensated at one level and were not. In some cases, wage theft happens by people who work for tips, not being given their tips. In other times, wage theft happens by people being told that their check will include the taxes being withheld, and then those taxes are never withheld, and they're liable for paying them. So there are a lot of ways in the world today, especially in the United States, that workers continue to be undervalued, and as a result, their dignity as human beings is disrespected. If you are doing the work and you cannot adequately feed yourself and your family and care for your body and have a home, then you're being disrespected. You're creating value in society for someone else who is not respecting your capacity to do so. So wage theft is just one example of many where, in a very stark way, workers are being disrespected. In other ways includes, there's a huge effort in the federal level as well as many state levels right now to talk about minimum wage, and should it be raised, and what does a living wage look like? And that is a really important discussion that the church should be involved in. Rerum Novarum really advanced the idea that the church can come out in favor of federally or at the state level mandated wage ceilings and floors. So the minimum wage is a wage floor, meaning you can't pay anybody less than that. And Rerum Novarum is precedence that we as a church, we as people of faith, have the right to go out into the public arena and say, this is a good policy. People should be paid at no less than, and in reality should be paid more than what is the current federal or state wage, because they have families, they are human beings, and they need to be able to care for themselves. If I could just say, there was a recent article by a philanthropist in Seattle whose name escapes me now. It was something along the lines of like, the pitchforks are coming for us. And from an economic standpoint, there's a lot of support for increasing the minimum wage. And one of the things that this article said was, in the current economic climate, business owners want their workers to be paid low wages, and they want their consumers to be paid high wages. That doesn't compute. Your workers are your consumers. So if you want your consumers to be able to consume your product, you need to pay them a wage that will allow them to do so. And there has been, over the past 40 years in this country, there's been a growing pushback on that idea, that is as if there was some way that we could pay low and medium wage workers less and less, especially taking into account inflation, yet somehow they could still consume in the society. And that is not a mathematical reality. It's not an economic reality. It also doesn't reflect our values as people of faith. So there's a whole lot to be said in terms of Catholic social teaching. You can look at Rerum Novarum. You can look at Economic Justice for All, which was a document that the bishops in the U.S. published in 1986. You can look at Pope Paul VI wrote quite a bit about work in Populorum Progressio, about how workers have rights, and those rights should be respected, and we can legislate them, and workers have the right to be in associations, i.e. labor unions, to advance that. Because there is an incredible power dynamic between workers and owners, business owners and legislators, that we need to be able to break up in order to advance the rights of workers and their dignity. So all of that firmly puts these economic ideas in the realm of our values and our faith.
And all of these documents will be in the links below to check out, so you can actually get that source material. Brianna?
If you couldn't hear Ashley, he said that all the materials will be put down in the below bar, and so you can all look at it. So sorry, Ashley, you're breaking up.
Sorry. Thanks.
My next question, Maria, is what are some examples of this teaching specifically being ignored and then being upheld? In what ways can you see it being? In what ways can you see it being?
So one context for this, as I mentioned, Rerum Novarum was published in many ways in response to the Industrial Revolution. So a time when the workers were being put into factories, a highly mechanized system that was really increasing output, massive upheaval in economies as well as in society, and there was also a push towards globalization. There was more trade happening. There was more conversation between nation states. This is all the context for Catholic social teaching, and this context has only increased in the world today. And so globalization is an incredibly important context for understanding this value. And in many ways, in a globalized neoliberal economy, we have an even greater need to discuss and advance in policies as well as in commitments from business leaders the rights of workers. So you may have been aware in the past 3 or 4 years there's been more attention paid to workers in Bangladesh who work in many of the factories that make our clothing. Mm-hmm. A lot of clothing which is sold in lower end chains like Walmart, but also in higher end chains. It's all happening in many of the same places. And the Southeast Asia has been a real center for economic growth in terms of factories and factory labor around clothing and shoes and a lot of fiber-based products. And so it's been also the center for a lot of policies, like how can we advance these workers, how can we make sure that they're not being abused, and yet they're consistently abused. So the reason Bangladesh was highlighted so much in the recent past has to do with incredibly unsafe conditions. Whereas where workers were caught in factories that were on fire and many died, and it was clear that they weren't getting access to water and to bathroom breaks, like basic human rights. And this is still happening today, and these conditions allow these products to be created for a very small price and then be sold at a much higher margin, and that profit is not being passed on to the worker. So it's just one example of how there's this globalized economy allows the clothes that you and I wear to be made thousands of miles away, kind of outside of our mindset, outside of our understanding, shipped here. We have very little connection to how it's being made, who is making it, how much it's even costing, and we're perfectly okay then to go and pay, 500, 600, 700% more, a 700% markup, even more in some cases, without even knowing who made this, what was their life like. An example closer to home, there's a movement of workers who pick our food. Started, the underpinnings are clearly in the movement that Cesar Chavez created and grew, but a modern look at that today is based on a group called the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, many of whom are migrants who are documented and undocumented, who come to the U.S. to pick the food that you and I eat every day. Tomatoes, oranges, primarily other vegetables and other produce that is grown in Florida. And they are working in extreme heat conditions, the kind of pesticides that you and I don't even want to eat, let alone breathe in day after day after day. And many of them are actually enslaved. They're brought here with the promise of work and documents and then kept, in some cases, for years. There are actual conditions, slave conditions in Florida. But a number of them are simply just not paid enough, and they have nowhere else to go. It's this idea that we have in the world that a bad job is better than no job. That idea doesn't exist anywhere in Catholic social teaching. We believe that we should have an economy that is people first, that is based on the dignity of workers. And we have in the United States many examples: wage theft, what's going on in Immokalee, tips, the fact that you can go out to a restaurant and you have no certainty that the person who's serving you your food is actually getting paid a minimum wage, let alone a living wage. Do they have health benefits? Because tipping culture in the U.S. is very different than abroad, and is a part of how we think, oh yeah, this person should just have to live off tips. Well, that doesn't have to be the case. There's this momentum in our economy and in our consumption patterns where we think that these clear examples of human rights abuses that don't respect the dignity of people, where we have no idea where our food is coming from, where our clothes are coming from, who's making them, and how their lives are affected by this system, we have no idea what's going on there. So there's lots of examples. That's all very gloom and doom. The reality is that we can break this momentum, and there are businesses and there are policies that have done that. And we as people of faith can be at the center of moving those and advancing them. So a really good example is Costco, kind of the big box warehouse goods provider, where you can go and buy 20 rolls of toilet paper and 8 packs and all that good stuff to be able to consume the amount that you would consume in a year, or buy the amount that you would consume in a year at one time, and therefore you can pay less. That kind of economic idea. Well, Costco has a great model where their workers on average start at $17 an hour. That's their starting wage. And they provide benefits, access to not only healthcare but also eye care and dental over time. And they have great policies for in the warehouses to ensure that workers are able to, consistently get access to the breaks that are legally mandated, for the bathroom, for lunch breaks, all those things where people, we think that that's normal. Well, it's consistently not happening across this country and across the world. And Costco is a profitable company and is able to continue employing workers, workers who can then consume at Costco. They have enough wages to be able to be Costco customers and consume in the economy, which is good for Costco and good for everyone else. So this idea that you have to pay workers less or else this company won't be profitable, well, we have solid examples where that's not the case. Costco is an example. It's been widely studied, and you can go look into it yourself. But the real question is what story do you believe about the economy? Do you believe this kind of idea that we have in the U.S. about bootstrapping, that you just have to try your hardest and you'll get far, or do we believe the reality that that we have the capacity to define what kind of economy we want to live in, and we as Catholics want to live in an economy that reflects that Christ died and rose for each one of us, and we have value, and we can define a society that reflects that. And not only can, but we should and we must, as you would have learned last week in the call to participation. But we have lots of examples for how we can advance it. And a really new example, really exciting, in the past month is something called the bad employer tax, where employers who consistently pay their workers a poverty wage can decide between two fates. They can either pay their workers more, or they can pay a yearly tax that will go to fund the services that their workers need because they're not getting paid enough. So if you pay your workers a poverty wage and your workers are, have to go get access to government health care or government child care, or they consistently need access to earned income tax credits because they're getting paid so low, they get some of their taxes back, which is an important program in the government that many people access and is life-saving. If you are paying your workers such low wages that they need to get help from the government to live, which is very true for companies like Walmart and Kmart and Sears and these larger Walgreens. If you're paying your workers so little that they need help from the government, then you should have to pick up that bill. You should have to pay that. So the bad employer tax is something that's being advanced across the U.S., but especially in Illinois and I believe Minnesota, on kind of a lower municipal city level to kind of test the ground and say, can we advance this on a bigger level? I was reading a book the other day about kind of the shift in our society after during the First World War, specifically the shift in the way the economy and society was structured in England. It was actually a novel. It's called Parade's End, and in it, one of the main character talks about how it was expected that an employer would care for his or her workers, well, in that case his, because it was, turn of the century England, and a majority of landowners and business people were men, white men. He was talking about it's expected. Why do we need, this was when healthcare was first being passed, universal healthcare was first being passed in England. Why do we need universal healthcare? Employers should be taking care of their workers. They should be ensuring that their workers have healthcare. Any good employer would do that, and that's about 100 years ago. That idea was beginning to die, and we stopped seeing workers as real partners in an economy and society, and started seeing them as mere inputs into an equation of how we make money. And that is not a people-centered approach, and that is we can build to an economy that is people-centered, where we stop thinking of workers as mere variables in an equation, which doesn't reflect our values, and start understanding that they're people, they're actors in this economy and this society, and we should be investing in them as opposed to seeing them as liabilities.
Which is something that Pope Benedict put out in his Caritatis in Veritate. That was that people-centered economy.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Caritas and Veritate is like, there's so much in there. It's not, I wouldn't, there's stuff about the environment, about the culture of life, about the economy, there's a whole lot in there. If you're looking for like a quick overview of Catholic social teaching, Caritas is a great place to go.
Awesome. Brianna, you have any more questions for Maria?
I just got one more, and I was just wondering, for everyone that's watching and is going to watch the YouTube video, what are some ways we can get involved in this issue?
So a couple of things. There are a lot of ways. Let's start. If you're a worker and you are a member of a union, or you can be a member of a union, you should do that, and then you should go and take responsibility for leadership in that union. So part of the union movement has really shrunk in this country, and as an organizer, I would challenge anybody who's a member of a union, if you don't already know, to go get to know your union, understand its inner workings and its leadership, and if you feel called to, if you think about it and you want to advance your capacity to make change for your fellow workers, to really think seriously about if union leadership as a shop steward or even in other ways is a role that you might want to play. There are some larger unions in the United States that have really advanced important policies in this country, and there are also unions that have kind of sat back and just simply been content to negotiate contracts on a yearly basis and not really step out into the public arena to advance a holistic look at the life and dignity of workers. And if your union is the latter, you should try and make it into the former. And you can absolutely do that. Other ways is if you're in the Chicago Archdiocese, you're welcome to come and get to know me and some of the other leaders in organizing Catholics for Justice. If you want to talk about how you can move your local legislators, your federal legislators to really take action on your values, that's what we talk about. And we're also we're taking some really great steps with some of the worst offenders like Walmart, who are consistently undermining the dignity of their own workers. You can also get to know other organizing across the country. So this, for example, this bad employer tax is the result of research done by organizations that are active in the public arena. And you can get to know those organizations in your area and see if there's a role that you want to play with them to really affect those policies. And you should absolutely, advance this conversation with people in your life, in your church, with your religious leaders, to talk about how you and your church, your local parish, can play a role in those policies. Take a look at the resources that Project CST are putting out around Catholic social teaching. Those are a really great start. But don't think that you can do it alone. It's all in the context of our community and us coming together to advance our faith values. So certainly reach out and get to know your union, your parish, Organizing Catholics for Justice, the Office for Peace and Justice in Chicago or in your archdiocese, wherever you are, and a lot of the great organizing that's happening across the country.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria. We really appreciate you talking to us and teaching us about this.
My pleasure.
So,
no, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Ashley. Oh, hey, it's my turn. Yeah, thank you. And you can you can get in contact with Maria at organizingcatholicsforjustice.org, and you can sign up, and she'll get in contact with you. And it's a really great organization doing some really great moving. We pray, but we also act, and this is one of the ways that Catholics can act for social justice here in Chicago. So thanks again, and be sure to tune in next week when we have our next guest talk about the preferential option for the poor and vulnerable and how we are called to protect them as well. So, Brianna, you want to lead us out?
Sure. Don't forget to send us your selfies on Instagram at OPJ Chicago, and let us know that you're on team #Project CST. Okay, anyway, this has been your daily dose of Catholic social teaching for your everyday life. Bye. I'm actually the one who turned it off, so bye.